Oh, intrigue, intrigue. There's something new in the picture. Okay, so I've got a whiteboard here because there are some things I want you to visually see. And, you know, I've shared with you before how at times I will have these thoughts that enter my head that I know aren't my thoughts because I wouldn't think that way. I wouldn't use those words. I wouldn't say something in that manner. So it's I listen to those. I understand that that's not me. That's the Lord showing me something. Well, just like that, sometimes I get these mental impressions, these mental images in my head that likewise they wouldn't be things that I would normally think about or see or imagine. So we have these amazing imaginations, and we know this from, I mean, we look at the fantasies and the things that are out there, science fiction, all the ways that we get to use our imagination and have sci-fi and all the ways that we use our imagination. But the thing that's different about what I will call visions is that they're not things that I would typically imagine or think on or ponder on, or and so when I get these impressions, I pay attention to them because it's just another way that the Lord speaks to me. Now, I also want to clarify that when I say visions, and I just explained how it works for me, that's not the end-all be-all of visions. I know people that have what they refer to as open visions. In other words, they literally see it in front of them like a movie screen. It's very real, and it can be happening right then and there. That's not how I've experienced them. So I don't want to limit God in any way because He's big. So I don't want to limit even a belief or an understanding or an interpretation about what a vision is. That's just how I experience visions, is kind of this mental image that isn't something that I would normally imagine or think on. Or so anyway, I wanted to share with you today, because I know we talked about the characteristics of God and about judgment. I want to share with you a journal entry. This was back in November of 2009. And I'm just going to read it to you because it explains what was going on that day. And as I read it, I'm going to pause because it's a visual, and I'm going to put it up here at the same time so you can kind of see what was going on in my mental imagery as I was going for the walk. So I went for a long walk yesterday, and at the time I was thinking of how many people I know who are sick, and I mean really sick with serious stuff. And it's like the enemy is really on the move. Now, I don't know if that's new terminology for you, this whole concept of an enemy, but there's a lot of information out there that in various, I don't want to say denominations, but there's a lot of information out there about this understanding that there is an enemy to God. And so we'll dig into that more along the journey, but basically that there's God and an enemy to God. And so we'll explore that more, but that's what I'm referring to here, that there's an enemy that is against the will of God. So I'll leave it at that for now. So could it be that this is his, being the enemy, his final rampage, because the end is almost here, and there's a lot out there about the end times. So this is where, at this point in my journey, this is where I was in a lot of my understanding and beliefs. So I want to keep that in context. This was November of 2009. These are some of the things that I'm pondering with the Lord at that point in my journey. I have a lot more puzzle pieces now than I had then, so I just want to frame that and keep that in context. So I was thinking of all of this as I walked, and my mind wandered to the whole fear of the Lord, love the Lord balance. Like there's this, we're told to fear the Lord, love the Lord, this. So I kind of see this, it's a balance. And so as I thought about this and all the sick people, I felt the Lord really begin to talk to me about his two attributes. Remember, we just studied the characteristics of God. His two attributes that seem to trip people up the most. I knew I was getting ready to receive a powerful lesson, and indeed I had a paradigm shift. So the two attributes are his judgment and his goodness. And it's interesting because I'm tempted to write his love, but that's from the old paradigm and would completely refute what he taught me. So when I started to see this, I'll just draw the whole thing out. So let's say there's a scale here. You know, there's this scale, this balance scale. And here's one. I'm a horrible artist. You don't want to play Pictionary with me. I shouldn't say that. But I can't draw very well. Okay, so there's this scale, and I in my mind, my initial thought was judgment and love. Okay, so that's kind of where I was with it. But at the end of this, he taught me that this isn't really the issue. The issue is that we get confused about his judgment and his goodness. So I'm going to replace this. Okay, so I always saw this as what the scale looked like, his judgment and his goodness. They're on either one side or the other. So then I began thinking again of all the sick people. Or could it be those who are experiencing financial difficulties? I know a lot of people at that time with financial difficulties too. Could be the death of a loved one, a broken relationship, a wayward child, whatever it is. There just seemed to be a lot of that trips us up in judgment and goodness. So let's see. So I began to realize that the enemy, the enemy that is against, that doesn't know truth or is against the truth, uses this paradigm right here to tell people one of two things about their circumstances. One is, you have done something to cause your circumstances, and this is God's judgment. Well, then I thought, this can't be true because Jesus tells his disciples that no one's sin caused the man to be born blind. It was so God's glory could be revealed. So, the Lord brought that scripture to mind. I'm sitting here walking along thinking about my thoughts around it, and all of a sudden this story and this truth that Jesus spoke, I remembered it. And the second thing that this paradigm can tell you about your circumstances is that if God is good, if he's good, these things wouldn't happen. And this is the taunt from the garden that questions God's nature, right? So if you go back all the way to Eden, that's all about God's nature. So if things are happening, God can't be good. In other words, these two things can't, that's the paradigm you get stuck in, and it can be very confusing. So both options and choices for viewing our circumstances are sinful because both of them are opposed to the truth of who God is. The enemy wants to keep us in this paradigm. If we stay in this paradigm, there's no peace in it. Like, it doesn't make sense. We can't make any sense of this. So I kept walking and I kept pondering, and then I realized what he was showing me. The truth that he is love and he is constant means that both of these attributes, his judgment and his goodness, both of them, where did I go in here? Yeah, his goodness and his judgment belong on the same side of the scale. So both are expressions of his love. So in my vision, in my mind, in my mind's eye, this moved over here. So you've got goodness, you've got judgment. And judgment is ironic. So what does God have to say about that? That's what judgment means. What does he have to say about that? All of them are expressions of his love, right? Okay, so all of a sudden I have everything on one side of the scale. literally, I saw his hand reach down and pick up judgment and add it to the side where goodness sat, and the scale tipped completely to that side. So imagine this scale is tipped and this side is way up here now. All right? So he asked me what goes on this side. If all of his stuff's over there, what goes over there, then all of a sudden I realized that it's the enemy, and in my mind I viewed the scale balancing again as the enemy was placed on the opposite scale. So over here goes enemy. Okay? Let me scroll. I'm running out here. Okay. So now if the enemy can't keep us in the first paradigm where there's goodness and judgment, this is the next paradigm he tries to keep us in. Let me show you what I learned about how this works, because this isn't right either. So from this perspective, the Lord asked me to play with the scale and the impact of free will on the balance. So I kind of pictured these individual people standing up here at the top of the scale. See these people standing on the top of the scale. I'm having a hard time going back and forth. Can you tell? I lose my place every time. And as I stand on the top of the scale, they have a choice as to which side they're going to jump onto. And this was with every single decision and every choice, because remember, motives is about your opportunity in every situation. So with every decision and every choice placed before you, what side of the scale are you going to jump onto? And so then I would see, well, then the scale would jump accordingly. Like if they jumped over here, it would go this way, and if they jumped over there, it would go that way, right? Do you see how that's working? But then the visual just seemed to scream out at me, it can't be that way, because the enemy's side is never at an advantage. Never at an advantage. The danger of this perspective is that the enemy can use this to condemn people for their mistakes by making them believe that they've somehow contributed to the enemy getting an advantage over God. See what I'm saying? So then I thought that no matter how many jump on to this side or how many decisions or choices go this way, that this side never shifts. It never goes in that direction. So this is always weighted here, and this is always weighted there. So it's very off balance, always. Okay? It doesn't move. So that would mean, because if it did, it would mean that we are somehow responsible for the victory. But the victory is already won, and it belongs to God. Do you see what I mean? We don't help the enemy win or not win, because it's already over. So all of a sudden I saw it. All weight shifted to God's side. There is no balance. All power is God's. The enemy doesn't have any. The weight is the power. That's the weight on the scale, is the power. And all of the power belongs to God. And what I saw then, this is kind of a little bit weird, but what I saw was this huge ammunition plant with all the ammo in the whole world. And there's a pile of bullets that get discarded because they're duds and they didn't get packed with powder. These are the enemy's bullets, the ones that don't have any powder in them. So those bullets are over on this side of the scale, and all the other ammo is on God's side of the scale, the ones that actually are packed. So the enemy will aim these blank bullets at the person who's standing up here on the top of the scale with every decision and choice that they have to make. We've all heard, this is funny, that we've all heard stories of robbers using fake guns or ones that aren't loaded to rob a store. And it works because the people don't know it's harmless. They don't know that there's no power to destroy or to harm them in those empty fake weapons, but they give it all away anyway. So this enemy aims those blank bullets of sickness, financial destruction, Really they have to do with the loss of provision, the loss of protection, or the loss of promotion. Those are three basic things that, if you look at when Jesus was tempted in the wilderness, those are the three things: provision, protection, and promotion, to intimidate people to see things from the first paradigm. God must not be good, or I've done something to deserve that this is God's judgment, which puts his judgment outside of his goodness and assigns power to the person to control God's character. Do you see what I'm saying? If God is on the balance, then the person controls God's character. Well, in this paradigm, if God's all on one and the enemy's over here, then we think the next paradigm is that somehow we think as people we control the outcome. We don't. Satan will use disease, Satan, the enemy, whatever you want to call him, will use disease and sickness to impact the lives of not just those who are sick, but the loved ones who are also vulnerable in the situation. Or what about financial problems, which are rampant today? They still are rampant, even 2 years later. So this is one of the things that as I pondered this, that I started to have an awareness of, that possibly the overemphasis on blessing and prosperity of God's people is one of the greatest tools that the enemy will use to bring people back to the first paradigm, because it becomes a way of measuring. So if a person believes that following Jesus means prosperity, and that's a measure for them, and that's the primary emphasis, and they don't prosper, then they logically have to conclude that either option 1 or option 2 from the first paradigm. Either he's not good, or I've done something to prevent his prosperity. So that puts you in control. You're part of the equation. So there are plenty of characters in the Bible highly favored by the Lord, whose lives are blessed but not easy and not full of wealth. The blessings come in the form of power to have joy, faith, and praise the Lord in spite of their lack or their struggles. And I think of Paul. He's content with a lot or with little. So the scale never moves. I just saw this picture. The scale never moves. All power was, is, and always will belong to God. Now, what's interesting about this is sometime later, about several months later, as I was reading, because, I'm like, well, is there actually truth in this? Lord, I'd love for you to confirm that this, show me in your word what you're saying. And it actually, in March of the following year, I was reading in Psalm 62:9, and I saw this scripture. It says, "Low-born men are but a breath. The high-born are but a lie. If weighed on a balance, they are nothing. Together they are only a breath." And then, "Common people are as worthless as a puff of wind." This is the New Living Translation. "And the powerful are not what they appear to be. If you weigh them on the scales, together they are lighter than a breath of air." So see, wherever we land on this side of the scales, that's not in alignment with God's will, we make a choice over here, it doesn't shift the scale, because we're lighter than a breath of air. All of that's lighter than a breath of air. So what matters is your choice, and it matters for you, not for God. It matters to God, but it doesn't matter for God. All of a sudden I saw this. Our choices matter to God because it affects us. He knows we're missing something. It doesn't change the outcome for God, but he cares about us and he loves us, and so our choices are relevant to him. When you look at the bullets that are aimed at your life and question God's goodness, the enemy has just handed you a blank bullet and you have no power. But when you look at the bullets aimed at your life and you declare God's goodness in the midst of it, you have the power of the entire ammunition plant behind you. And as you claim God's goodness, he actually places that ammo and those bullets within you. They are his power and his glory for the world to see through you. And they are packed with powder. They are powerful. The world sees God's power and glory when you proclaim his goodness and sing his praises in everything. In everything. It doesn't matter if there are 6 million standing over here on this side of the scale and only 60 on God's side. It will never shift. It's never going to shift. A remnant is more powerful than the whole world. Gideon's 300 are more powerful than all the armies of the earth. David's 5 stones are mightier than a giant in all his weaponry. The other piece of great news is that I can't make, and please hear this, I can't make a bad choice that will tip the scale in the enemy's favor. God can be patient and long-suffering with my transformation because he has nothing to lose in my mess-ups. He can gain my complete devotion with his loving kindness, grace, and mercy. See, when I think of this image, the strategy becomes clear. The victory is already determined. We know the end of the story. Jesus said from the cross, it's finished, right? The battle truly is in my own mind. I win that battle by proclaiming God's goodness all the time and laughing at every empty bullet, all the duds that the enemy points at me. I become steadfastly rooted in the absolute character of God. He is love, and both his judgment and goodness are based on that alone. All I have to do is remember the image of this scale. So, gosh, I haven't read that in over 2 years. But it was a great visual, and I hope you capture that. I hope you let that sink in. There is nothing, absolutely nothing you can do that is going to make God lose. Like we somehow think we have the power to make God lose if we go the wrong way. The good news about that is everything is covered by his grace and his mercy. I mean, love isn't unconditional if there are conditions to it, right? So he can love you through the mess. He can love you through your choices. There's grace for that. There's forgiveness for that. There's mercy for that. He has your best interest at heart all the time. All the time. And so, anyway, I hope that blesses you. I know that it was a huge paradigm shift for me as I processed that with the Lord and his word tells us, come, let's reason together. So as he joined me in that place of my paradigm and asked me questions and showed me things and made me reason through it with him, I had a huge paradigm shift. And that's what this journey with the Lord is about. What are we missing? What aren't we quite getting all the way? Because he knows that we don't necessarily have the whole picture. So, that was good stuff. We've done a lot of work around purity motives, our will, being intimate with the Lord, which is all around obedience, all this thing about iniquity and sin and transgression, what all that is about, and what God's character is, and how this whole thing of his goodness and his judgment and this enemy that's in the picture, all that stuff, kind of what's at play. So the next time we get together, we are going to talk about presence, God's presence. So what your homework is to then go study what the Word has to say about the presence of God. And I love this because my whole thing is presence coaching. My tagline is show up and shine. And I'm passionate about presence and about living a life in the presence of the Lord. That's what this is all about, is journeying with God throughout our whole lives, because he's always present. He is always present. So what is that about being aware that you are in the presence of the Lord? So be blessed. Have fun with that. And I am so enjoying this time with you. I'm just having fun. I hope you can sense that I'm having fun and enjoying this time with you. And so have fun digging and searching into what it is about his presence and the power of that and what it means to be in his presence. And we'll see you next time. Thanks so much.